Hello, in the previous lecture I looked at Southeast Asian and Indonesian prehistory. In this lecture I want to look at Indonesia in the period 0 to 1400, what I'll call the classical period. Now, as a backdrop to this, we know that the first humans in Southeast Asia and Indonesia were the Austronesian people. Around about, let's say, 2000 BC, possibly earlier, a group of people undertook what has to be one of the most amazing migrations in human history. The people we call the people the Austronesians. And they migrated, we think about 3500 BC from the island of Taiwan, then about 3000 BC into mainland Southeast Asia. After that, now this gets pretty amazing, they head down into the Pacific to Fiji, Samoa, Hawaii, and eventually to New Zealand around about 800 AD. They also travel west over to Madagascar. And what that means is that there's a whole variety of cultures and languages that are very similar, that link Madagascar, New Zealand, Hawaii, and Java, for example. Now, this migration excludes most of the island of New Guinea and all of Australia. So up until the arrival of the colonizers, European colonizers, it was still Australo-Melanesian people who resided in Australia and Papua New Guinea. And of course they still reside there now, just that they're not the only ones. So outside of Australia and Papua New Guinea, Southeast Asia and Indonesia is basically, I don't know what the best term is, taken over, let's say, by Austronesian people. Now Austronesian people are different, whereas there was only a little bit of evidence of agriculture amongst the people in Papua New Guinea and no evidence of agriculture elsewhere amongst the Australo-Melanesian people. This new migration of Austronesian people bring animal husbandry, that is, they keep things like chickens, pigs, and they also bring agriculture. They bring horticulture, the planting of gardens, but they also begin to develop agriculture. Now the difference is horticulture, you depend on rain. Agriculture, you develop irrigation channels. So once human beings start, in the history of our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, as soon as we start to use gardens, we change fundamentally from being hunter-gatherers into what we call Sweden cultivators. And with that, all kinds of things change too. We get a more hierarchized society, we get denser populations. And similarly, when humans make a transition from Sweden cultivation to agriculture, where we start using irrigation channels and canals and stuff, we get similar changes in social structure, in beliefs, and in economy, obviously, because we're now planting large quantities of single crops, monocrops, if you like. And in this case, it's rice. Rice cultivation spreads throughout Southeast Asia, some period after the Austronesians arrived. So we get the development, on the one hand, of agriculture. The other major change we're getting is the development of distant trade. It's no longer local trade, but distant trade. Now, I'm going to frustrate you and skip through all the slides because I'm going to give you a very quick lecture here to give you a sense of what's going on. Here we are. We get the development of trade from India to China through Southeast Asia and Indonesia. Now, if you follow my mouse, you can see it's a long way this way and a very short way comparatively that way. So why did the trade not go overland? Why did it go across the ocean? Well, firstly, there was some overland trade, and famously later there's the Silk Road, which goes all the way to the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula, as you probably know. But actually, for most of this period, travelling by ocean is much quicker and effective than travelling overland. So it's much quicker to go by boat this way than it is to go overland. And that's still the case today. For example, the Malacca Straits, see the Malacca Straits just around here, of some of the most trafficked waters in the world, along with the straits here leading from the Suez Canal. So in other words, water was important then, not as important now, but it still is quite important now. So there are two changes going on. And what this develops is a new kind of social order, an agricultural social order that we also know as civilization. Civilization. The ideas from India and China are spreading with the trade. There's a new ideas associated with Hinduism and Buddhism in particular. For some reason, India was more influential than China. This might have had something to do with rules emanating from China after the year 0, which make Hinduism and Buddhism more influential in Indonesia. So we're developing a more stratified society. Before there's only two professions, hunting and gathering. Now we're getting stratified society where there are farmers, we are now getting a literate society. People can read and write, so there's a literati, an intellectual class that are making inscriptions on stones and making manuscripts out of the leaves of palm trees. We're getting, on top of this, a court. We're getting kings who think of themselves as Deva Raja, God kings, God kings. So we have a court, we have intellectuals, we have a peasantry that are producing rice in a model that one famous Marxist anthropologist by the name of Wittfogel called Oriental despotism. In other words, there's a despot who owns all the land and all the people who work for him, and it's a very it's required. He says the only way you can get the large scale of labour in order to make canals and in order to make irrigation channels and so on is by having a despotic ruler who's ordering people around. The idea is shaky and subject to a lot of debate, but I'll just leave it at that. So we're getting, before this, we've got animist religions where people believe in the local spirits. Now we're getting world religions of Hinduism and Buddhism, where the political and religious outlook used to be local, based around the dispersed settlements. Now we're getting much more, we're getting core areas of urban areas and peripheries where the farming goes on. And I should say most of this in Indonesia and Southeast Asia is happening around rivers, mostly around rivers where the trade can come and go. So if we talk about demography, there's a core and a periphery, but also these cores and peripheries are based around the rivers. Still, we think upland and inland areas are still hunting and gathering and swidden cultivating. So the change now is that we have famously what was called hills and valleys. In the valleys where the rivers are, you have civilisations, all the things I've just been talking about, and in the hills you have either hunter-gathering or swidden cultivating. Swidden cultivating, just to remind you, means gardening, basic gardening, where you slash the crops, then burn them, then come back a few years later and plant again. Okay, so that's pretty much the classical period. I'll give you an overview of some of the famous, we're talking about the first states of Southeast Asia now. I'm sorry to go so fast. We got a state we think of as Funan in the current area of Cambodia, Champa in the area of South Vietnam, Chenla around Laos, Pegu, a famous Burmese kingdom. Srivijaya is another famous kingdom. This was actually where Champa and Pegu, which I just mentioned before, are probably more based around a sedentary court in a very extensive rice farming area. Srivijaya was based more around trade, and you can see it's in a very important trading zone here. And it's very hard to say exactly where the centre of it was. It's probably a decentralised kind of empire. And we're looking here at Sumatra. This is where the contemporary Singapore is yet to be invented. We'll get to that later. Srivijaya, Mataram, a famous kingdom in central Java, known for its temple Borobudur. Here's one of my photos of Borobudur, and also Prambanan. Oh, by the way, hopefully I've got the slides for later, but also Angkor, the famous Cambodian, here we are, famous Cambodian capital, around the period the late 700s to 1400. So it's around this purple area, which is known as Khmer here. And here's Pagan or Bagan, which is a famous temple complex in Burma or Myanmar, which has just opened up for tourism again after, as I speak, in 2013. And we can visit that to find famous temples. And one other kingdom I'll just mention now is Majapahit, which is one of the later empires based in the north of Java and spreading its influence throughout areas of Southeast Asia. Okay, so that's basically the model, if you like, for the period 0 to 1400 and what we call the classical period. In the next lecture, we will look at the post-classical period of 1400 to, let's say, 1870.